Cathryn Collins joins me now. Her documentary is called VLAST, which is Russian, and it means power in English. And it's a very interesting story. Cathryn, do you want to talk a little bit about VLAST?
Sure. Thank you, Julie. VLAST is a very kind of searing tale about an oligarch, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was formerly the richest man in Russia and is now sitting in a prison, actually, in Moscow. He was convicted on tax evasion and fraud charges in 2005, and a lot of people would argue that he ended up in prison for defying President Putin and on all sorts of fronts. And the film VLAST uses his story as a way of really looking at all of the tumultuous events that have occurred in Russia in the last 20 plus years.
Now, you're an American girl. How did you decide to come to do a documentary about something happening in Russia, about the life of someone living in Russia?
I'd been interested in Russia since I was a kid. I actually studied Russian when I was in high school, which is very, very long time ago. And I had kind of been following the undoing of Soviet Russia, and this young kind of charismatic man appeared on the scene and eventually took control of one of the sort of, I suppose, largest oil assets in Russia. It was a ruin. But he distinguished himself early, kind of in the mid-90s, for setting up a bank, then taking over with partners this oil company. And I just found that nobody was really paying attention to him. Nobody is an exaggeration, but in the U.S. press, you know, particularly at that time, we really weren't that aware of what was happening in Russia, and we kind of demonized Russia. It still was sort of Cold War hangover. And over time, I just felt that no one was adequately explaining to me why this guy was significant, both on his rise and then after his fall when he was arrested and then convicted. And he always seemed to be, me, and still does, seem to be the most emblematic bellwether, really, of all that happens in Russia.
So at its root, VLAST is not just about him, but it's about a lot that went on and that is going on ever since, 1986, when Russia was, when the wall fell, so to speak.
Yes, and in fact, really, Khodorkovsky is a bit of a hologram in the film. It certainly centers on his life and the events that both were provoked by him and then provoked by others surrounding him. However, it's really about a group of very young people who, like him, were kind of the best and brightest, and people that he brought into his circle. And it really shows how his trajectory kind of both inspired them and in many cases actually destroyed their lives or derailed their lives. And so it's really a window into the sort of creation and dashing of a lot of dreams.
And what is the most profound thing that you learned and that you're able to relate in the documentary to the viewer?
At the screening actually last night, a young man who's probably maybe in his early 30s said to me after the screening something that I had actually forgotten was the most revelatory thing that I learned in making the film, which is this group of people that emerged right after the Soviet Union fell apart, the people that were young enough not to have actually been entrenched in Soviet Russia and old enough to immediately take advantage of all the openness, so to go abroad to study, to have interaction with foreigners through education or professional experience. That group of people does not look like this caricature that we have of the new Russia, which is, fast cars, hookers, boats, bling. Mm-hmm. They're not like that. They are these extremely idealistic, extremely intelligent, extremely sensitive, extremely broad-minded people. And they look and act like Americans of the same age, of the same generation. And this young guy yesterday said to me, he's like, I was just shocked to see this amazing group of people that remind me of my friends. Mm-hmm. And we don't know that there's that whole layer of people in Russia.
You mentioned also that you found the press wasn't really covering his story, his trial, all that was going on with that. So why should Americans care about this? What is it about this that, we should really?
Well, it's a great question. I think there are two things. Number one, the message that was sold to Russians, literally the message that was sold, the package that was delivered to them in that immediate post-Soviet era, the playbook essentially was written by a group of Americans who went and consulted to the administration. And what they sold to them was this idea of a market economy and of democracy. But we didn't actually give them the tools to transform that culture in a healthy way to an actual functioning democracy. So we actually sold them a false bill of goods. So mass chaos ensued, political chaos, economic chaos, and the backlash against the United States and against the acceptance really of increased authoritarianism in Russia as represented by Putin is in effect something that we helped create by not helping to implement a real democracy, which of course sounds like things that are going on in the United States and other parts of the world. So it's a cautionary tale, in effect also about intervening. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. And the second thing is, I think that, it's the classic line of do not read a book by its cover. Mm-hmm. It's very important to look into, why is this man in prison? It's, it may not be for the reasons that are stated.
Okay. And he has another trial.
He's on trial right now. Right? He's on trial right now in Moscow. There should be a verdict sometime in the next month or two. His current charges of embezzlement and money laundering carry a potential sentence of 22 years. He's getting close to the end of ultimately an 8-year sentence, and so he could be in prison for a very long time.
Interesting. Now, you call yourself a geopolitical nerd. Right. Why that title?
Well, I say that, I suppose, in contradiction to, again, don't read a book by its cover. My real life, my real business is a design business, and I design clothing and textiles and things that adorn our surface. And I suppose while I walk around worrying about my own surface and the surface of others, my head is completely up in the clouds thinking about other, I suppose, more serious and nerdy things, and this film is the manifestation of that.
So how did this film come about? Because here you are in the design world, living, working in New York, but you're following what's going on in other parts of the world and seeing what's happening around you, and then all of a sudden you decide, I'm going to make a documentary about this?
I think a couple of things. One is, I was walking around being a little bit schizophrenic for a long time. I'm using the term loosely. Being frustrated that I couldn't or wouldn't allow myself to attack this topic. And I just never saw anybody else doing it. And at a certain point, I remember saying, I was around 45 at the time, I remember saying, you know what, I'm not getting any younger, and nobody else seems to be doing this, and why shouldn't I do it? And I was never expecting that I was going to largely be funding the film myself, but I was able, because of my business, to actually take the first steps and attempt to do it. And it just kind of went on from there, and I got the bug.
And it seems to have paid off, because you have a distributor for your film, which is a big hurdle, and it's a great accomplishment, right? And your film right now is in the hands of a distributor and trying to be sold, correct?
Yes, I mean, when I say I had no expectations, I shouldn't say that I had negative expectations. I had no clue as to what to expect. So yes, the idea that I have a distributor, Seventh Art Releasing in Los Angeles, that is going about the business of trying to find a home for it, both on television and some kind of a theatrical release, is fantastic. And that I have a foreign sales agent, Mercury Media in London, which has the film at MIPCOM, this gigantic broadcast market in Cannes right now.